Good morning, Emily.
Wait, you're not Dan.
Well, yes, I am Dan.
Well, you know what I mean. You're not Dan, the usual podcast Dan.
Well, you've got me there. So, you mentioned we're going to do things a little bit differently for the podcast today. The topics seem like they're a little bit less concrete. So, Emily, what are we sharing with the audience today?
Yeah, we're doing a little bit more conversational today since it's you and I, and it's a little bit different. I did want to go over a little bit our different perspectives and experiences. We do have a little bit of an age gap between us, and we've taken different paths to get where we are today. I thought we could talk a little bit about that, as well as the pros and cons to kind of taking a step back in order to take a step forwards career wise, and then talk a little bit about what it's like to be a financial planner. There's definitely different perspectives and things displayed online with different ads and also just what people assume that we do. So I thought we could go over that a little bit today.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it.
Sounds fair to me. So let's start at the top with me versus you and maybe some of the differences in our career so far. So they say hindsight's 2020, meaning we always know after the fact what to do, but maybe not what to do in the moment. So Emily, you recently mentioned you turned 30, and for context, I'm 23, almost 24. So let's say you woke up tomorrow and you were 23 again. Were there any things that you did that you either regret or you know, uh, didn't do and regret not doing, financially speaking?
I mean, there's always several. There's definitely certain things, I would say getting into a routine about things, which I know sounds vague, but when I was younger, early 20s specifically, I thought about a lot of things, specifically like retirement saving, as okay, I'll do that later in life when I'm ready or when I have extra. Or, you always kind of hear vague advice from everyone older than you in life, parents, coworkers, whatever. And they're like, start investing early and it'll grow, it compounds, all that. And you're like, yeah, 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 I know that's true. But like doing it at 20 versus 25 can't make that much of a difference. I'll get to it when I get to it, when I'm in a little bit more stable in life. And yes, the compounding part is important and that does add up. But for me, I found that I wish I had started doing things like that, even in really, really small increments, even if it was 20 bucks a month, I don't care, just to get into the habit of it. Because the longer I put it off, then it seemed like this really big, daunting thing. Like, oh, I have to start saving for retirement and, do all this research and figure things out. When just start it, just do it. And you can, kind of do a better job of it as you go and as you learn more and as you earn more. But start doing it. I wish I had done that sooner and just kind of automated it for myself. And let's see. I mean, I did a lot of things in my 20s that they seemed like they weren't going towards a specific goal. Definitely when I was your age, I didn't know that I wanted to work in finance. I had a much different experience that I know you've mentioned. But I tried a lot of things, a lot of different things. Like my college degree, what I went to school for the first time was medical. I used to work in surgery. And a lot of those experiences that I had were good. I'm glad I did them. I learned a lot, but they didn't necessarily add to like what I'm doing now. I think I kind of floundered around a lot.
I don't think that's a good way to put it, Emily. Floundering. I think you deserve a little bit more credit than that. We're all on this big blue sphere that's spinning at a million miles an hour and whatnot. And it's hard to find what it is you're passionate about and what you want to do. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try to find it by the time you graduate college with a piece of paper. But that's the reality is some people spend their entire lives and they never find what they like to do. And they're some of the most interesting people I know. And then there's other people that find it when they're 20 and they ride with it their entire career. For you, it just happened to come sometime in those late 20s, early 30s. But I don't think you should beat yourself up about it. I think you should actually commend yourself for trying a lot of things and putting yourself out there to see what it is you do like versus what it is maybe you don't like. And I think that also kind of helps you understand, where your strengths and maybe some of your weaknesses are and how to leverage that into another position. I think the other thing you mentioned that I think is important to touch upon briefly is saving and saving earlier because it could seem like a fruitless endeavor when you're like, I save $20 a month. Like, it's not going to do much for me. Why don't I just, go to the bar or use this money for something that's a little bit more fun? But I think the part that gets missed about that is it's less the actual value of the dollar, and it's more about building the habit. When I was in middle school, I like rejected doing my homework for some reason. I didn't think it was worth my time, and I'd rather go hang out with my friends. And I used to, talk to my teachers and say, hey, like, no offense, like, do my grades really matter that much in middle school? And, I really respect my teacher in 8th grade because he told me they didn't really matter that much. And I felt like he was the only one that was honest with me. But what he did say is they don't matter. But what will matter is the habits you build from doing your homework and studying now, because you're going to get in high school one day. And, if you don't have those habits in place, they'll be difficult to put in place. But if you are used to studying, used to doing what you're told and, the homework and whatnot, it'll be that much easier for you. And I think this is something that relates to finance directly. Yeah, $20 won't do a lot for you, but building that habit and knowing how to pay yourself first and, understanding the fluctuations in the market and how all of that interacts with you and your personality, beliefs, and views on the world, I think is really important. And it's something that is often overlooked because at first those amounts are so negligible and small compared to your net worth when you're 55 or 60. To give you a personal thing that I think I regret or probably noticed, whether it's for me or some of my friends in my early 20s, is keeping up with a lot of my friends in terms of lifestyle. And not to be a downer or anything, but most of the people you meet in high school or college, you don't talk to once you graduate. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I have a lot of really good relationships with friends and family. But there's really, you have to ask yourself, do I want to go out this day? Do I need to spend the money on this or that to keep up and, have a lifestyle similar to the people I'm around at this age? And most often the answer is no. And that's something that I learned because most of the people I tried to mimic or, have a lifestyle similar to, I don't really even talk to anymore. And that money and that time probably could have been spent, I think, doing other things.
Yeah, that's probably true. And I mean, thinking back to when I was younger, I definitely did similar things like that. I think my issue was being impulsive. Like if someone invited me to something, it was like, yes, of course I want to do that. And it was maybe an activity I wasn't even interested in. I just had, I don't know, a fear of missing out or I wanted to be included and I would just do and try everything, which was great. Again, I got to do a lot of things and there's a lot of variety, but I've definitely narrowed it down as I've gotten older and I'll say no to more things. It's like, that's not actually what I want to do with my limited amount of time and energy, even like finances aside. That's the only thing you can't earn back and do again is your time that you've used for something. And I am a lot more particular and guarded with it. Even if it doesn't seem like it, I've narrowed things down quite a bit as far as like what I do in the evenings and weekends, because I think that is really important for building habits as well as like investing in everything. How you use your time is so incredibly important.
That's a really good point, and especially saying no to things. I think that's a skill, and for some people, it's really difficult to consistently say no to friends, family, opportunities, endeavors, things to do on the weekend, etc. But I think learning how to say no and how to be comfortable saying it in your 20s is pretty beneficial because if you don't, you're going to get pulled in so many directions and wake up one day and realize you haven't even been doing the things you want to do or the things you want to pursue. And I think that's a really good point you bring up there. Additionally, you mentioned how, in your 20s you did a bunch of things and now, you're working in a completely different industry than you were when you graduated college. And I'm pretty excited to talk about this because it's something I think we both have a little bit of experience with. And personally, I have a bunch of friends out there in the workforce now that seem to be dealing with a very similar situation where they work a job for a few years, at least long enough to understand what it entails and understand the industry enough, and they realize I've made a mistake. I don't want to be here, and I can't see myself doing this for 20 to 30 more years. And that's a really difficult thing to internalize, and it's even harder to actually commit to and take action on. And I know that you have some experience with this topic, so I wanted to talk about it, and maybe if you were comfortable sharing some of your personal experiences taking a step back in a career and how that might actually be a benefit long term.
Yeah, I think that's something I would, in general, recommend to people. For a bit of context for listeners that don't know my background, The few things I did immediately before I transitioned to finance and started working here at My Wealth Planners for Dan. I was a corporate support supervisor of a home health agency. And then from there, I transitioned into being a business owner. I owned and ran a coffee shop here on Main Street where we lived for about 3 years. And then I sold it before I started working for Dan. So I was used to being the boss, being in charge, having an assistant, having people under me, and then transitioning to business owner where you are absolutely the boss. Everything is on you. I could make any decision I wanted and no one was really going to question me on it. I didn't have to run my ideas past anyone else or do things for others in the same way, I guess, as when you're at kind of a lower tier in a company. But then when I transitioned to finance, of course, I didn't have the experience and I had to take a step. It felt like a big step back to me. I really enjoyed the first year I had working here for Dan, but, I wasn't licensed yet. That's one of his, I don't know if requirement is the right word, but, he wants you to work here for a year, really get to know the clientele and the processes and be familiar with everything before you take the next step and get licensed and registered. So I spent the first year what to me felt like, filling out forms, sitting in on meetings and taking notes and making Dan coffee in the morning, which was good in a lot of ways, but it definitely was a hard pill to swallow going from being my own boss and doing whatever I wanted to, some of those tasks that I don't think I enjoyed quite as much. But then as the months passed, I came to realize I was learning so much, even if I was just sitting in on Dan's meetings. And for any clients that are listening, I was kind of just sitting there quietly. Any of them will be familiar with that because as someone who wasn't licensed, I had to be very careful about even commenting on anything that could be construed as advice. I was not allowed to do. So to err on the side of caution, I was pretty much silent in all of Dan's meetings, just quietly taking notes. And sitting side by side with Dan in meetings, I learned an astronomical amount of information that I definitely would not have done if I had just jumped into a different role, tried to go on to a different company, for example, and get licensed right away, start taking on clients, which seems so much more glamorous. You make more money doing that than you do as like someone's assistant. But I would have missed out on that base of knowledge and education that I got working the first year before I could be a planner. And it was a consideration when I was kind of debating taking this job. I didn't want to take that step back, financially. Obviously, it was a pay cut for me to take that job, and just the transition of title, which doesn't mean anything, but from boss to assistant was painful. And now I'm so unbelievably glad I did it, and I would tell anyone to do the same. And, I know in your instance, I'll transition to you a little bit here. Your story isn't quite the same, but you took a step back in a certain sense of the word.
I would say so. I'd been working at my firm throughout college and then after college as well. And, there was a certain point where it hit me. I realized I'd have to leave. And, in that position, I was, my main task or responsibility was business development. So bring people in, that's really it. So there was a certain point where I realized I'd never actually learned how to crawl, meaning, do the back end paperwork, the administration stuff, know how accounts are opened and how to facilitate all the back end stuff and paperwork. And I also realized if I stay with this firm long term, I might wake up one day and be 30, 35 years old and realize besides sales and maybe bringing folks in to do financial planning, I don't have a lot of skills or don't really know a ton about financial planning. And at that point in time, I made a decision and had a conversation with myself where I said, well, one, I'm going to leave the firm. And two, I'm likely going to take a step back in terms of compensation and responsibilities for a little bit so that I can learn the basics and the things maybe I haven't learned at my last firm. Before we recorded this podcast here, I was doing a little bit of preparation. When I was applying for jobs like this one last year, I was offered a position that actually pays me, I did the math, about 85% more in compensation than I am currently being paid, which is a significant amount. And I rejected the position because, I like I said, I knew I wanted to take a position where the main compensation was not salary and it was education. And that position paid a lot in the short term, but I didn't think I would learn a lot. The responsibilities, the roles, and the opportunities for progression and development were not as abundant as I would have liked. So it would have been a very short-sighted, or it would have been a very short-term decision for me to take that position, and it would not have benefited me very much in the long term. I might have woke up one day at the age of 30 and said, "Oh my gosh, I don't have many transferable skills. I've just been paid well for 7 years," as opposed to this position where the main compensation for me currently, I said, was education. And, the money follows when you know what you're doing and you're competent in a position. And I think committing to that has been one of the better decisions I've made, because I could not imagine where I'd be right now and what my career would look like if I wasn't here, because the amount of things that I've learned in the last 4 months and the just learning from doing and learning from watching has been extremely, extremely great use of my time, and something I'm extremely passionate and fortunate for. And I think that's something I'm very appreciative of, is the fact that I recognized maybe in your 20s, you don't need to take the position that pays you the most. Maybe think about the education and the transferable skills you'll build in your 20s, so you can leverage that into more compensation and more opportunities in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, as opposed to taking a position right out of college that pays you the most, where you might not learn the most, but you'll be able to keep up with the Joneses, as we said. And I think that was really beneficial for me, and something I'm very fortunate I had a lot of good advice and good guidance in my ear.
Yeah, I think that's very commendable. I think a job that pays quite a bit more from your calculations is incredibly tempting, especially at a young age. You'd be kind of set up and you could do a lot with money like that, but you can't put a price on experience and education. I think it's amazing that you recognize that and made the decision to quit your previous job and accept this one rather than the high paying one and move across country. You moved here from Jersey and had to start all over kind of for this job. I don't think you even know anyone else in town when you first moved here, if I'm correct.
0 people besides, I'd say you and Dan.
Yeah, that is quite commendable. I'm going to put you on the spot for a second and ask if there's one thing that you would, say that you learned quite a bit in the last few months that is really stood out to you in your time here.
I mean, I can talk all day about the actual nitty-gritty, the financial planning things that I'm learning, etc. But I think going off of what you just said about how I knew nobody when I started here, I think I want to talk about that a little bit, because when I moved here, one of the things I told myself was, "Hey, Daniel, you know nobody." I didn't consider myself the most extroverted or people person kind of personality. However, I said, when I move here, I'm going to say yes to everything for like the first 4 months, meaning that if somebody invites me out or somebody asks me if I want to participate in X, I'm going to say yes. And if I regret it or didn't want to do it, fine. But at least I put myself out there for every opportunity to talk to somebody and every opportunity to meet more people and get myself involved in the community and meet people that, are of like mind and like interests. And I think that was really beneficial for me, because, even we were talking today, we work in a wonderful neighborhood here in Longmont. And, I'm speaking to people that live in the neighborhood about, how their dog's doing and whatnot, because I've started to build rapport and be more open to conversations and opportunities. And I think early in my career and just early in my life, having that conversation with myself about saying yes to everything for a little bit, so that I can, expand my surface area of opportunities and conversations, has been really beneficial for me, not only on a professional level, but on a personal and life level as well.
Sure. That's, essentially a skill set that I think people forget about, but being able to build community like that is incredibly important. And it's not something that you can even really be taught. You just have to go out and do it and practice it and live that way. Because I know, I'm going to circle back a little bit. I know you've mentioned to me before that you have kind of always known you wanted to work in finance and more or less had goals in that department. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do you know early on exactly what you want to do with your life? I think that's pretty rare.
I think first and foremost, I'm considerably more fortunate than I deserve in having that understanding, because I know it's not something the majority of folks have. There's a joke one of my old clients used to make. They've known me since I've been a baby. They said, ever since you were a young kid, you were interested in dollar signs, and we knew you'd be doing something in money. And it's funny that, we've been working with her, and I have a wonderful working relationship with her as well. And now, 20 years later. So I think I always just had like a innate interest in dollar signs, money, the flow of money, saving versus spending it, etc. However, I didn't know financial planning or this career was even a thing when I was in college. And one of the things I did in college, very similar to what I just said about how I would open myself up to every opportunity. When I was in college, I would pick any and everybody's brain about what they did for work, if they liked it, the good, the bad, the ugly of their job, and their opportunities and maybe where they see themselves going. And the reason I did that is because, kind of like talking to people in the community, it increased the surface area of potential opportunities that I was aware of and that I knew where I fit into them. And that really helped me understand what it was I did versus didn't want. I think a really good thing to do in college too is take some sort of personality test to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, because you want to find some sort of opportunity that rewards your strengths but also has some sort of personal interests so that you'll stay invested and interested in the career. And I think that was one of the really great things I did, or that my firm provided me in college, is they made me take a personality test, and I was able to hone in and understand what those strengths are. You can spend a lot of time in your life working on your weaknesses, and maybe if you spend your entire life working on your weaknesses, you'll get them to a B plus. But my strengths are already at an A minus, so if I continue working on my strengths exponentially, I could probably get them to an A plus, which I can't do for weaknesses. And I think understanding that in a career is really important, because leveraging those strengths and understanding you as a person and where you might actually progress faster than other areas is really important. And I think just learning about different careers and where you fit into them is something I took a lot of time to do in college. And I was also very fortunate. My college provided me a lot of opportunities to learn about those things, and I took advantage of most of them when I had the chance.
I think that's really good advice. Did you find that a lot of people were open and chatty about their jobs and their experiences, or were they a little bit more confused about why you're asking? I don't think it's common that people bring that
Sure.
up and ask.
Different depending on the context. So there were, a lot of job fairs, career search opportunities that the school would provide, where, folks a couple years older than me that are doing recruiting would come in for the firm, and they'd sell people on the career and position. And I think just asking them the right questions about, hey, what do you like? What don't you like? What's your average day look like? Whatnot? And really understanding that is important. But everybody has the opportunity to do that. I think where I kind of went, outside of the traditional realm is, I went up to a couple of my teachers, especially in the finance department, and I said, hey, you do this on the side. You've talked about your actual career. Would you mind spending 5 to 10 minutes with me either today or maybe another day and talking about it with me? Just because I'm not sure if it's something I'm interested in or if that's a route I'd like to pursue. And if we can have a 15-minute conversation about it, I think that would be a really great use of my time. I'd love to buy you a coffee one day. And I did that with a couple of my professors. Not only did it strengthen the relationships I have with them and help me keep in touch with them now, but it provided me so much great advice from so many successful people that are way brighter and way more successful than I am at this point in my life. And being able to, I hate the phrase pick their brain, but to pick their brain was such a good use of my time. And I think something many people don't take advantage of, because, these professors, they're teaching because they want to help the next generation. And I've found, at least in my experience, when I was open to asking them about their experiences, they loved talking about it. I had a buddy that called me last week asking me about my career, and he had 30 minutes. I spoke for maybe an hour and 15 minutes because I can do this all day, and I think most people that are passionate about their careers want to do the same.
That's interesting and really good feedback. Since you had all these, probably it sounds like expectations of what it would be like based on all these conversations, have you found, now that you've worked here a little bit, that it is in line with what you expected, or is it quite a bit different than what you'd assumed?
I'd probably have to say a little bit of both. There's just always going to be a natural learning curve in any industry you join, and in a vacuum, every position has its benefits, its downsides as well. But the variable you can't account for are the people, and I think the experience can be heavily dependent on who you're working with. And so I'd say I knew a lot coming in about the technical aspects of various positions, the flexibility, the career progressions. However, depending on who you're working with and the type of people you're working with, that experience can vary widely. And that is something that I don't think you can prepare for. And you have to learn more on the fly because everybody's different. And especially in this industry, you're dealing with a wide variety of folks. And that's more of a learn as you go experience, I'd say.
Certainly. I think personalities and experiences of your colleagues and boss and whoever else you work with has such a huge impact on your job that you can't possibly prepare for that. I don't know if the team is what you expected before you started working here, but I think you've done a good job fitting in and acclimating, it seems like to me.
Even a broken clock's right twice a day, right? So. But Emily, last thing I wanted to talk about with you here today is just the firm, not even the firm, but more the position of a financial planner and the career itself, because I just kind of said, I could talk about this all day. We love doing it, and we're very passionate about it. So the CFP recently came out with a new series of promotional material that for some of our financial planning listeners probably weren't a big fan of, because they shed light on the industry in a way that I don't think a lot of folks were particularly fond of. And they're public. If you want to go check them out, feel free to do so. However, I don't want to spend time bashing them. I'm sure there's a lot of good work and good people that tried to put their best foot forward for those promotion materials. But instead of taking 10 minutes talking about the ads and why I don't think they're legitimate or indicative of the industry, instead I wanted to try to build up the career for, maybe folks listening who don't know what they want to do, or maybe are thinking they want to transition careers. So, kind of like in The Wolf of Wall Street where, they ask you to sell this pen to me. Emily, sell me on the career of financial planning based on your experiences thus far.
I think there's two main points that I would say are two big reasons about why I really enjoy financial planning. First one, I will tie into those ads. For those who haven't seen them, the overall theme of them is, if you're a financial planner, you have a lot of freedom to do whatever you want. Is a very loose thing that you can take from those ads. And I would say that's true, depending how you go about it. It's more, as a planner, you have a much more flexible schedule and ability to use your time and talents for whatever you want to do. And that is a big selling point to the profession for me. I think it's important to be intentional with your time still. It is very tempting, I think, like as a young person trying to figure out what career path you want to take. You're like, a career with flexibility is, of course that sounds great. And I think you need to stop and ask yourself, why? Why do I want freedom and flexibility? What would I do with my time? How am I going to give back? How am I going to still ensure that I'm being productive, either for my personal development or my community or the people I care about? Having freedom is only valuable because you can then do something with it. I think it's incredibly important to sit down and, I'm a list person. I'm a very linear thinker. So I like, a list of personal goals, short-term and long, and community-oriented, and people I care about, and business development and work, of course. That was an obvious one. But what are you going to do with your time? It's not just, I have free time to sit home and, play video games, which is fine if that's what you enjoy. It's not necessarily for me, but it's, being a financial planner is amazing because it's flexible. But why? It's important to figure out still what you're going to do with that. And then the other, main reason is you can make such an impact on people's lives if you take this job seriously and you're passionate about it, and you take the time to get to know each client or household that you're working with and ask them pretty much the same question. Okay, if you had unlimited time or money, or even just more, what would you do with it? Why do you want that? It's one thing to have a goal, I want to save $100,000. Great. Congratulations. I will help you achieve that. But why? What are you going to do with it? It's so much easier to stay on track for a goal and, really work towards it and stick to it if there's a passionate reason why you want it, or what you're going to do with it, or who you're going to use it for, or maybe it's just that sense of security for you and your family. Great. That's wonderful. That's easier to work with than just numbers. I think a lot of people think working in finance, you're just, watching the stock market all day and looking at spreadsheets. And we certainly do plenty of that, but that's not like the important part to me. It's coaching people and getting to know them and getting them to think, okay, what do you want? What are these opportunities that you wish you had? We can create those for you. I love that part of my job. That's if anything would sell the profession, from my perspective, it's you can actually help people be whatever version of themselves they want to be. What other job lets you do that? I love that.
All right, I think I'm sold.
Good, because you're already in it. Is there anything that you would add to that? I mean, I guess I haven't asked you what you enjoy so much about this profession.
I think using the word profession is wise because a lot of my friends or folks just in life have jobs. I think one of the things I'm fortunate about is this is a career. So anything I learn now, I know will continue to compound for the remainder of my career. Barring anything unforeseen, I do expect to stay in this career indefinitely. And I think that's great because it means that any and everything I'm learning today will continue to grow, as opposed to somebody who, is in a position that in 5 years they'll be promoted and everything they've learned will more or less be forgotten about. So I think just the ability to continually learn, knowing it's being put to good use, is very exciting for me, whether it's through designations, asking questions, or just learning from experience with clients. I think another thing that I really love about this career, and this is something I've started to notice more being with my wealth planners because I get to see just a consistent volume of clientele on a regular basis, is we get to learn from the good and the bad that clients have went through. And I don't think that can be stressed enough because there are consistent themes and things that every client over the age of, say, 60 talks about. It's, I want to provide for my family. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to be healthy. I want to be happy. And that's about it. And it makes me realize, well, if all these 55, 60, 70-year-olds all want the same thing, there might be something to that. And I think learning from all our clients, maybe the things they did really well or the things they did really poorly, whether financially speaking or just life in general, I think being able to learn from all those various perspectives cannot be understated because it helps me selfishly design my own life in a way where I get to take the good and the bad from everything they've learned.
That's a good point. We are in a position to get pretty much unlimited free advice, even if people don't realize they're giving it. It's not a bad spot to be in.
It's not too bad if you like perfect. That's what I like to say. Well, Emily, I think I'm going to change it up a little bit here. Instead of something you learned this week, is there anything we discussed in the podcast today that is a new thing you think you learned?
I'm going to go the personal route, and I was actually very impressed and very glad to hear that you had turned down that job offer, making quite a bit more to work here. I think that's such an important thing to have done, and I really look forward to working with you over time. I really value coworkers who have similar values and ethics to myself, and I'm very appreciative that you joined our team here and moved to Longmont for this.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I do appreciate that. Yeah, going off of that, I do think just taking that position, it would have been extremely short-sighted of me. I would have been paid considerably more now, but I'd wake up one day and who knows if I'd be able to leverage that into a better life or better opportunities for myself down the road. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Cheers.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.